What does feminism mean today? In this personal, eloquently argued essay, adapted from her much-admired TED Talk of the same name, Chimamanda Adichie, award-winning author of Americana, that ends in an AH, offers readers a unique definition of feminism for the 21st century, one rooted in inclusion and awareness, drawing extensively on her own experiences and her deep understanding of the often masked reality of sexual politics. Here is one remarkable author's exploration of what it means to be a woman now, and at the moment rallying cry for why we should all be feminists. And I chose to read this book because I really wanted to, I'll direct it to you. I really wanted to understand the difference between what feminism means in Africa and what feminism means in America. And she does a very good job. She's also the author of Half a Yellow Sun, Purple Hibiscus, and Americana, which seems to be a very popular book. Okay, she says, this is a modified version of a talk I delivered in December 2012 at TED Houston, a yearly conference focused on Africa. Speakers from diverse fields deliver concise talks aimed at challenging and inspiring Africans and friends of Africa. I had spoken at a different TED Talk a few years before, giving a talk entitled The Danger of the Single Story, about how stereotypes limit and shape our thinking, especially about Africa. It seems to me that the word feminist and the idea of feminism also is limited by stereotypes. When my brother Chucks and his best friend, both organizers of the TED Houston conference, insisted that I speak, I could not say no. I decided to speak about feminism because it's something I feel very strongly about. I suspected that it might not be a very popular subject, but I hoped to start a necessary conversation. So that evening, as I stood on stage, I felt as though I was in the presence of a family of a kind, an attentive audience, but one that might resist the subject of my talk. At the end, the standing ovation gave me hope. Oklahoma, this is the beginning of her story. Oklahoma was one of my greatest childhood friends. He lived on my street and looked after me like a big brother if I liked a boy. If I liked a boy, I would ask Oklahoma's opinion. I'm sorry, it isn't Oklahoma, it's Oklahoma. Was funny and intelligent and wore cowboy boots that were pointy at the tips. In December 2005, in a plane crash in southern Nigeria, Oklahoma died. It is still hard for me to put into words how I felt. Oklahoma was a person I could argue with, laugh with, and truly talk to. He was also the first person to call me a feminist. I was about 14. We were in the house arguing, both of us bristling with half-baked knowledge from the books we had read. I don't remember what this particular argument was about, but I remember that I argued and argued. Oklahoma looked at me and said, "You know, you're a feminist." It was not a compliment, I could tell from his tone, the same tone with which a person would say, "You're a supporter of feminism, of terrorism." I did not know exactly what this feminist meant. I did not want Oklahoma to know that I didn't know, so I brushed it aside and continued to argue. The first thing I planned to do when I got home was look up the word in the dictionary. Now, fast forward to some years later. Oh, sorry. In 2003, I wrote a novel called The Purple Hibiscus, about a man who, among other things, beats his wife and whose story doesn't end too well. While I was promoting the novel in Nigeria, a journalist, a nice, well-meaning man, told me he wanted to advise me. Nigerians, as you might know, are very quick to give unsolicited advice. He told me that people were saying my novel was feminist, and his advice to me, as he was shaking his head sadly as he spoke, was that I should never call myself a feminist, since feminists are women who are unhappy because they cannot find husbands. So I decided to call myself a happy feminist. Then an academic, a Nigerian woman, told me that feminism was not our culture and feminism was un-African. And I was only calling myself a feminist because I had been influenced by Western books, which amused me because much of my early reading was decidedly unfeminist. I must have read every single Mills and Boone romance published before I was 16. And each time I try to read those books called classic feminist texts, I get bored and struggle to finish them. Anyway, since feminism was un-African, I decided I would now call myself a happy African feminist. Then a dear friend told me that calling myself a feminist meant that I hated men. So I decided I would now be a happy African feminist who does not hate men. At some point, I was a happy American feminist who does not hate men and who likes to wear lip gloss and high heels for herself and not for men. Of course, much of this was tongue-in-cheek, but what it shows is how the word feminist is so heavy with baggage, negative baggage. You hate men, you hate bras, you hate African culture, you think women should always be in charge, you don't wear makeup, you don't shave, you're always angry because you don't have a sense of humor, and you don't use deodorant. Now, here's a story from my childhood. When I was in primary school in Nsukka, a university town in the southeastern Nigeria, my teacher said at the beginning of the term that she would give the class a test, and whoever got the highest score would be the class monitor. Now, class monitor was a big deal. If you were a class monitor, you would write down the names of noisemakers each day, which was heady enough power on its own, but my teacher would also give you a cane to hold in your hand while you walked around and patrolled the class for noisemakers. Of course, you were not allowed to actually use the cane, but it was an exciting prospect for a 9-year-old me. I was very much wanted to be the class monitor, and I got the highest score on the test. And to my surprise, my teacher said the monitor had to be a boy. She had forgotten to make that clear earlier. She assumed it was obvious. A boy had the second highest score on the test, and he would be monitor. What was even more interesting is that this boy was a sweet, gentle soul who had no interest in patrolling the class with a stick, while I was full of ambition to do so. But I was female, and he was male, and he became class monitor. I have never forgotten that incident. If we do something over and over again, it becomes normal. And if we see the same thing over and over again, it becomes normal. If only boys are made class monitor, then at some point we will all think, even if unconsciously, that the class monitor has to be a boy. And if we keep seeing only men as heads of corporations, it starts to seem natural that only men should be heads of corporations. I often made the mistake of thinking something that is so obvious to me is just as obvious to someone else. Take my dear friend Lewis, who was a brilliant progressive man. We would have a conversation. He would tell me, I don't see what you mean by things being different and harder for women. Maybe it was so in the past, but not now. Everything is fine for women now. I didn't understand how Lewis could not see what seemed to be evident. I love being back home in Nigeria and spend much of my time there in Lagos, the largest city and commercial hub of the country. Sometimes in the evenings when the heat goes down and the city has a slower pace, I go out with friends and family or to restaurants and cafes. One of those evenings, Lewis and I were out with friends. There is a wonderful fixture in Lagos, a sprinkling of energetic young men who hang out around outside of certain establishments. So, as we were leaving, I decided to give the man a tip. I opened my bag, put my hand inside the bag to get my money, and I gave it to the man. And this man who was happy and grateful, took the money from me and then looked across at Lewis and said, "Thank you, sir." Lewis looked at me surprised and said, "Why is he thanking me? I didn't give him the money." Then I saw a realization dawn on Lewis's face. The man believed that whatever money I had ultimately came from Lewis because Lewis is a man. In recent U.S. elections, we kept hearing about the Lilly Ledbetter law. And if we go beyond that nicely alliterative name, it was really about this. In the United States, a man and a woman are doing the same job. With the same qualifications, and the man is paid more because he is a man. So in a literal way, men rule the world. This made sense 1,000 years ago because human beings lived in a world in which physical strength was the most important. There are, of course, many exceptions. Today, we live in a vastly different world. The person most qualified to lead is not the physically stronger person. It is the more intelligent, the more knowledgeable, the more creative, the more innovative. Then there are no hormones for these attributes. A man is as likely as a woman to be intelligent, innovative, and creative. We have evolved, but our ideas of gender have not evolved very much. Not long ago, I walked into the lobby of one of the best Nigerian hotels, and the guard at the entrance stopped me and asked me annoying questions. Was I the name? What was the name, the room number of the person I was visiting? Did I know this person? Could I prove I was a hotel guest by showing him my key card? Because the automatic assumption is that a Nigerian female walking into a hotel alone is a sex worker. Because a Nigerian female alone cannot possibly be a paying guest paying for her own room. A man who walks into the same hotel is not harassed. The assumption is why he is there for something, that he is there for something legitimate. Why, and this is parenthesis in this book, why, by the way, do those hotels not focus on the demand for sex workers instead of on a sensible supply? In Lagos, I can't go alone into many reputable clubs and bars. They just don't let you in if you are a woman alone. You must be accompanied by a man. And so I have friends who arrive at clubs and end up going in with their arms linked with those of a complete stranger, because that complete stranger, a woman out on her own, had no choice but to ask for help to get into the club. Not long ago, I wrote an article about being young and female in Lagos, and an acquaintance told me it was an angry article and I should not have made it so angry. But I was unapologetic. Of course I was angry. Gender as it functions today is a grave injustice. I am angry. We should all be angry. Anger has a long history of bringing about positive change. But I'm also hopeful because I believe deeply in the ability of human beings to remake themselves for the better. Now back to anger. I heard the caution in the acquaintance's tone, and I knew that the comment was as much about the article as it was about my character. Anger, the tone said, is particularly not good for women. If you are a woman, you are not supposed to express anger because it is threatening. I have a friend, an American woman, who took over a managerial position from a man. Her predecessor had considered had been considered a tough go-getter. He was blunt and hard-charging and particularly strict about the signing of timesheets. She took on her new job and imagined herself equally tough, but perhaps a little kinder than him. He didn't always realize that people had families, she said, and she did. Only weeks into her new job, she disciplined an employee about a forgery on a timesheet, just as her predecessor would have done. The employee then complained to top management about her style. She was aggressive and difficult to work with, the employee said. Other employers agreed. One said they had expected that she would bring a woman's touch to her job, but she hadn't. Didn't occur to any of them that she was doing the same thing for which a man had been praised. What struck me with her and many other female friends I have is how invested they are in being liked. They've been raised to believe that their being likable is very important, and this likable trait is a specific thing, and that specific thing does not always include showing anger or being aggressive or disagreeing loudly. We spend too much time teaching girls to worry about what boys think of them, but the reverse is not the case. We don't teach boys to care about being likable. We spend too much time telling the girls they cannot be angry or aggressive or tough, which is bad enough, but then we turn around and either praise or excuse men for the same reasons. All over the world, there are many magazine articles and books telling women what to do, how to be, how not to be in order to attract or please men. There are far fewer guides about men pleasing women. I teach a writing workshop in Lagos, and one of the participants, a young woman, told me that a friend had told her not to listen to my feminist talk. Otherwise, she would absorb ideas that would destroy her marriage. This is a threat, the destruction of a marriage, the possibility of not having a marriage at all, that in our society is much more likely and used against a woman than a man. We do a great disservice to boys in how we raise them. We stifle the humanity of boys. We define masculinity in a very narrow way. Masculinity is a small, hard cage, and we put boys inside this cage. We teach boys to be afraid of fear, of weakness, of vulnerability. We teach them to mask their true selves because they have to be, in Nigerian speak, a hard man. What if both boys and girls were raised not to link masculinity and money? What if their attitude was not the boy has to pay, but rather whoever has more should pay? Of course, because of their historical advantage, it is mostly men who will have more today. But if we start raising children differently, then in 50 years or 100 years, boys will no longer have the pressure of proving their masculinity by material means. But by far, the worst thing is that we do to males, is by making them feel they have to be hard, that we leave them with a very, very fragile egos. And the harder a man feels compelled to be, the weaker his ego is. And then we do a great disservice to girls because we raise them to cater to the fragile egos of males. We teach girls to shrink themselves, to make themselves smaller. We say to girls, you can have ambition, but not too much. You should aim to be successful, but not too successful. Otherwise, you will threaten the man. And if you are a breadwinner in your relationship with a man, pretend that you are not, especially in public. Otherwise, you will emasculate him. But what if we question the premise itself? Why should a woman's success be a threat to a man? What if we decide to simply dispose of that word? I don't know if there is an English word, but that I dislike more than emasculation. A Nigerian acquaintance once asked me if I was worried that men would be intimidated by me. I was not worried at all. It had not even occurred to me to be worried, because a man who would only be intimidated by me is exactly the kind of man I would have no interest in. Still, I was struck by this because I am female. I'm expected to aspire to marriage. I am expected to make life choices, always keeping in mind that marriage is the most important. And marriage can be a good thing, a source of joy, love, and mutual support. But why do we teach girls to aspire to marriage, yet we don't teach boys to do the same? I know a Nigerian woman who decided to sell her house because she didn't want to intimidate a man who might want to marry her. I know an unmarried woman in Nigeria, when she goes to conferences, wears a wedding ring because she wants her colleagues to, according to her, give her respect. The sadness is that a wedding ring will indeed automatically make her seem worthy of respect, while not wearing a wedding ring would make her easily dismissible. And this is in a modern workplace. Our society teaches a woman at a certain age who is unmarried to see that is a deep personal failure, while a man at a certain age who is unmarried has not quite come around to making his pick. It is easy to say, but women can just say no to all this. But the reality is more difficult, more complex. We are all social beings. We internalize ideas from our socialization. Even the language we use illustrates this. The language of marriage is often the language of ownership, not the language of partnership. We use the word respect for something a woman shows a man, but not often for something a man shows a woman. Both men and women will say, I did it for peace in my marriage. When men say it is usually about something they should not be doing anyway. Something they say to their friends in a fondly exasperated way. Something that ultimately proves to them their masculinity. Oh, my wife said, I can't go to clubs every night. So now for the peace in my marriage, I go only on weekends. When women say, I did it for peace in my marriage, it is usually because they have given up a job, a career goal, and a dream. We teach females that in relationships, compromise is what mostly likely women do. We raise girls to see each other as competitors, not for jobs and accomplishments, which is, in my opinion, a good thing, but for the attention of men. We teach girls that they cannot be sexual beings in the way boys are. If we have sons, we don't mind knowing about their girlfriends, but our daughters' boyfriends? God forbid. But we, of course, expect them to bring home the perfect man for marriage when the time is right. We police girls. We praise girls for virginity, but we don't praise boys for virginity. And it makes me wonder how exactly this is supposed to work out, since the loss of virginity is a process that usually involves two people of the opposite genders. Recently, a young woman was gang raped in a university in Nigeria, and the response by many Nigerians, both male and female, was something like this. Yes, rape is wrong, but what's a girl doing in a room with 4 boys? Let us, if we can, forget the horrible inhumanity of that response. These Nigerians have been raised to think of women as inherently guilty, and they have been raised to expect so little of men that the idea of men as savage beings with no self-control is somehow acceptable. The problem with gender is that it prescribes how we should be rather than recognizing how we are. Boys and girls are undeniably different biologically, but socialization exaggerates the differences and then starts a self-fulfilling process. Take cooking, for example. Today, women in general are more likely to do housework than men, cooking and cleaning. But why is that? Is it because women are born with a cooking gene, or because over the years they have been socialized to see cooking as their role? I was going to say that perhaps women are born with a cooking gene, until I remembered that the majority of famous cooks in the world who are given the fancy title of chef are men. I used to look at my grandmother, a brilliant woman, and wonder what she would have been paid had she the same opportunities as men during her youth. Today, there are more opportunities for women than there were in my grandmother's time because of changes in policy and law, which are very important. But what matters even more is our attitude, our mindset. What if in raising children we focus on ability instead of gender? What if we focus on interest instead of gender? I know a family who has a son and a daughter a year apart in age, both brilliant at school. When the boy is hungry, the parents say to the girl, "Go and cook Indomie noodles for your brother." The girl doesn't like to cook Indomie noodles, but she's a girl and she has to. What if both parents from the beginning taught both children to cook them? Cooking, by the way, is a useful and practical life skill for a boy to have. I never thought it made much sense to leave such a crucial thing, the ability to nourish oneself, in the hand of others. I know a woman who has the same degree and same job as her husband. When they get back from work, she does most of the housework, which is true for many marriages. But what struck me that was whenever she changed the baby's nappy, she said, whenever he changed the baby's nappy, she said, "Thank you" to him. What if she saw it as something normal and natural that he should help care for the child? I am trying to unlearn many lessons of gender I internalized while growing up, but I sometimes feel vulnerable in the face of gender expectations. The first time I taught a writing class in graduate school, I was worried, not about the teaching material because I was well prepared and I was teaching what I enjoyed, but instead I was worried about what to wear. I wanted to be taken seriously. I knew that because I was female, I would automatically have to prove my worth. And I was worried that if I looked too feminine, I would not be taken seriously. I really wanted to wear my shiny lip gloss and my girly skirt, but I decided not to. I wore a very serious, very manly, and very ugly suit. The sad truth of the matter is that when it comes to appearance, we start off with men as a standard, as a norm. Many of us think that the less feminine a woman appears, the more she has to be taken seriously. A man going into a business meeting doesn't worry about being taken seriously based on what he is wearing, but a woman does. I have chosen to no longer be apologetic for my femininity, and I want to be respected in all my femaleness because I deserve to be. I like politics and history, and I'm happiest when having a good argument about ideas. I am girly. I am happily girly. I like high heels and trying on lipstick. Gender is not an easy conversation to have. It makes people uncomfortable, sometimes irritable. Both men and women are resistant to talk about gender or are quick to dismiss the problem of gender because thinking of changing the status quo is always uncomfortable. Some people ask, why the word feminist? Why not just say you are a believer in human rights or something like that? Because that would be dishonest. Feminism is, of course, a part of human rights in general, but to choose to use the vague expression human rights is to deny the specific and particular problem of gender. It would be a way of pretending it was not women who have for centuries been excluded. It would be a way of denying that the problem of gender targets women, that the problem of not being human, but specifically about being a female human. For centuries, the world divided human beings into two groups and then proceeded to exclude and oppress one group. It is only fair that the solution to the problem should acknowledge that. But that is not what this conversation is about. Gender and class are different. Poor men still have the privilege of being men, even if they do not have the privilege of being wealthy. When I learned about systems of oppression and how can they be blind to one another by talking to black men. Some people will say a woman is subordinate to men because it's our culture. But culture is constantly changing. I have beautiful twin nieces who are 15. If they had been born 100 years ago, they would have been taken away and killed because 100 years ago, Igbo culture considered the birth of twins to be an evil omen. Today, that practice is unimaginable to all Igbo people. What's the point of culture? Culture functions ultimately to ensure the preservation and continuity of a people. How am I doing? I have more? Read more? I am the child who is more interested in the story of who we are in ancestral lands in our tradition. My brothers are not as interested as I am, but I cannot participate because Igbo culture privileges men and only the male members of the extended family can attend the meetings where major family decisions are taken. So although I am the one who is most interested in these things, I cannot attend the meeting. I cannot have a formal say because I am female. Culture does not make people. People make culture. If it is true that the full humanity of women is not our culture, then we must make it our culture. I very often think of my friend Okoloma. May he and others who passed away in that Sosoliso crash continue to rest in peace. He will always be remembered by those who loved him. And he was right that day, many years ago, when he called me a feminist. I am a feminist.